Reporting from the CBS News Apollo headquarters, Kennedy Space Center, correspondent Walter Cronkite.
You see the venting of the liquid oxygen in the spacecraft there a moment ago. That full 363 feet, 6,600,000 pounds of it standing there. It weighs half again as much as a small destroyer. You might also note in the background a very heavy cloud cover, because that is the condition here in Florida this morning. On this coast, at any rate, the sky is supposed to be solidly overcast at around 5,000 feet at launch time, some 52 minutes from now, and that solid cloud cover is just about over us now. Winds are supposed to be from the east-southeast at 10 knots. That's not the most favorable direction, blowing back onto the Merritt Island Space Center here, but it is acceptable. Temperature around 64 degrees. None of those conditions are perfect. The visibility won't be very good on this launch from the ground, but they are acceptable conditions for launch. During this flight, there also will be a live television from space, the first test of a new Westinghouse television camera, the camera that will be used on the surface of the moon. The previous cameras we have seen, RCA cameras, which have worked so well in the past, have been supplanted now by this Westinghouse camera, which was the plan all along, a camera that can stand the long pressurization on the moon. It weighs almost twice what that former camera did. We'll have the two transmissions, one on Wednesday morning around 9:30. That will be just to the interior of the lunar landing module. And then around 2 o'clock on Thursday afternoon of this week, the walk of Rusty Schweickart outside of the spacecraft. Let's look at the astronaut activities as they got prepared for this flight this morning, as they awoke at 5:45. At their crew quarters some 5 miles from Launch Pad 39A. Here's the command pilot. That was not McDivitt. I thought at first it was. His hairline's very similar to McDivitt's. One of the several technicians who were at the breakfast with them. Here they are as they begin to suit up. This is Scott. This is Rusty Schweickart, the lunar module pilot. Schweickart, 33, MIT graduate. Scott is 36. This is McDivitt, the commander, 39-year-old man who is in charge of this flight and has to make the go, no-go decisions. Here they are in their spacesuits, carrying their portable air conditioner equipment as they leave the crew quarters for the special van, which takes them the 5 miles along these roads across the marshes of the Cape and Merritt Island to the launch pad. At this point, they were running about 5 to 8 minutes late because of that delay with the helium regulator I mentioned. There was some delay in getting them started from the crew quarters. The van sat there for several more minutes. Inside, they can link up with other air conditioner equipment if they desire, or stay on the portable equipment which they carry with them. The crew at the crew quarters sends them off with a good luck sign. This their last ride in a wheeled vehicle. Their next trip is going to be on top of that Saturn V with its 7.5 million pounds of thrust in the first stage. More powerful than any vehicle man has ever built. And there you get a good view of it. A little earlier this morning, as the van approached, which you see there in the bottom of the picture, that structure has to hold up this whole 6.5 million pounds of vehicle and all of its fuel. The fuel is included in that 6,600,000 pounds. The venting you see is of that liquid oxygen, which is down in the minus 200 degree range and boils off in an earth environment. As it sits there on the pad, they have to continually push more of the liquid oxygen into the vehicle because it does boil away. That's what you see, the steam vent to the liquid oxygen. Liquid oxygen is used as the oxidizer. Since there is no oxygen in space, and it takes oxygen to burn anything, including a rocket engine, you've got to take your oxygen along with you. So they take it along in liquid form. The astronauts you saw just there crossing over with the suit technicians into a elevator which takes them up to the top of the Rector base and then over to another elevator on up the total distance of 320 feet to where their command ship rests atop the Saturn V rocket. There to the first level. If they were coming back down that way, and here you see them crossing the short catwalk from the umbilical tower and that high-speed elevator over to the White Room. Here the technicians have been working through the night, and for the last 4 hours the backup crew has been working in there testing all of the systems of the spacecraft, waiting for the prime crew, the ones that will fly today, to arrive. They are then helped into the spacecraft and they themselves check out everything and also check the pressurization of their suits, which are pressurized in case anything should happen in space and they lost pressure in the spacecraft itself. They could still get back safely and survive the hostile environment of outer space. Nelson Benton is at the Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston, and I wonder, Nelson, what the mood is at Houston this morning on the moments before this crucial flight.
Walter, the atmosphere here was described in one word by Eugene Kranz, who's the flight director for Apollo 9. He called it electric. And perhaps the reason for that electricity is this thing that's standing behind me. That's the lunar module. It must behave properly on its own with 2 astronauts in it. It must behave properly with relation to the command service module, the sort of mothership for the flight. It is the trickiest mission that Apollo astronauts have tried to fly so far, indeed the trickiest mission of manned space flight. It is more difficult, officials say, than the historic moon flight of Apollo 8. And many officials here say that they would be surprised if Apollo 9 does all that it is setting out to do. The Mission Control Center, which is the nerve center for this flight, was powered up yesterday at about midday. There are more people there now than there have been for previous missions because there must be people and control consoles for the LIM and for the portable life support system, the packs that the astronauts will use while the spacecraft are depressurized. All told, there are about 30% more people in the entire Mission Control Center than there have been on previous flights. It's configured just about the same way as it will be when we make the flight to the moon. The major concern, of course, is the first 5 days in which the LIM will be worked out. That's the busy part. And then there are 5 rather uneventful days. And some say, well, why have those uneventful days? Well, Chris Kraft, who's the director of flight operations, said that anytime you put 3 men on top of a Saturn, you get all out of the flight that you can. Walter?
Nelson, will be coming back to you from time to time at Houston, the Manned Space Center, where, of course, the controls for this flight are. Here at the Merritt Island Space Center, the Kennedy Space Center as it's called. It's not really Cape Kennedy any longer, you know. We're back a few miles and a little north of the Cape itself. But here they control only the launch phase, and then the control goes immediately to Houston. And Nelson will be checking in with you frequently during the next 10 days, and particularly in the next 5, as you point out, which are the crucial ones to this mission. There is an experiment, however, later on in the flight is going to be conducted that we'd be remiss if we didn't mention at all, because perhaps it'll have as much influence on all of our futures as anything else that takes place on this flight. And that is, in the last couple of days of the flight, some photography from orbit checking our environment. We have found that we can tell from space a great deal about this world we live in with photographs. We can tell, for instance, how crops are doing, where they're likely to fail. We can begin to see the colors change. With infrared photography, we can tell something about the temperatures of the oceans and where fish are likely to be. Tell something about anomalies, things that are going wrong with the crust of our Earth. They even believe that eventually they may be able to tell something about population with infrared photography by just the heat of the number of bodies there below. Well, a series of experiments and photographs over 2 days in the latter part of this flight is going to add a great deal to our store of knowledge in that new science, which may have a great deal to do with all of our futures. This lunar module, which we're talking about so much today, we might explain to you just a little bit, something of it here, before we get into more detail in the flight itself. This is the service module, so-called, and the command module. We have been used to seeing fly around like this. It is this that went to the moon, that took the Apollo 8 crew, Frank Borman and his fellows, to the moon and back in Apollo 8 in December. This part detaches and comes back, the command module, which I can't seem to get loose here. I assume they'll be able to do it when they get ready to come home. The service module is jettisoned, and this command module part is that part that comes back, 12 feet high. Now, it docks with the lunar module, which is this part here, by simply slipping in with a docking collar, very much like that, and I hope also with a little more ease than I found to do it. They do have about a foot of leeway, but it's a very tight maneuver as they come in. Actually, there's a probe on the command module that goes into a funnel-like drogue, it's called, a docking ring on the lunar module. That probe fits right in. They can be 1 foot off, but not more, and still slip into a docking position. It's a pretty tricky maneuver. This is the lunar module itself. It's 22 feet high, just about evenly divided between these two. This ascent stage a little bit larger in height than the descent stage. This is actually 2 vehicles. The 2 men who go through a little tunnel down into this vehicle when they are docked stand up in it, up in the front. They stand, they do not sit down, stand in an area about the size of a couple of telephone booths, Schweikert over on the right and McDivitt over here on the left. They look out a couple of windows here and a docking window up at the top. All around here are various antennae. The radar antenna for a rendezvous, and S-band antenna for communication with Earth, hi-fi antennas and other stuck around on the outside of the lunar module. Now, this entire thing goes down to the surface of the moon, this being the descent stage. There's a little step here, a little front porch it's called, and 9 steps to the moon, which the men will descend when they get to the moon's surface. Once this engine under here has fired, and it is throttleable from 1,050 to about 9,800 pounds. That is, it can be speeded up or slowed down to settle this gently on the moon. That settles down on these, roughly 1 yard wide pads. These come out once the module has separated from its garage that takes it into space. Down on the moon, the men come out of this hatch, walk down on the moon's surface. When they get back in and ready to blast off, then this engine works in here to carry them back to the command ship circling the moon and waiting for them with 1 astronaut remaining aboard. On this particular mission, that astronaut remaining aboard is David Scott. Schweikert and McDivitt will be riding this LEM for the first time in space. This thing is not streamlined, it's not protected in any way because it's operating only in that benign atmosphere beyond the atmosphere. It's really not what we would refer to atmosphere. Out in space, where there is no oxygen, where there is no resistance to speed, where there are no winds to buffet it. It's so thin, as a matter of fact, to keep the weight down that, as McDivitt has said, he could put his foot through it if he was not too cautious. It is surrounded by a blanket to protect it from micrometeoroids and from the extreme heat out in space. The space, you know, it gets down to 450 degrees below zero and up to 450 degrees above, depending on whether you're facing the sun or not. And so one side of this vehicle could be 450 degrees cold and the other 450 degrees hot. But it will spin to equalize those temperatures so that it won't bake on one side and freeze on the other. Let's go to the Grumman Aircraft Engineering Company out in Bethpage, Long Island, which manufactures this vehicle. And there Steve Rowan and Scott McLeod are standing by. Steve, come in.
Walter, as you say, the LEM is a completely different vehicle. It's, of course, not aerodynamically designed to fly in the atmosphere, and therefore it's kind of an ugly-looking vehicle, I suppose, pretty to the engineers and pretty to the men who've worked with it, like Scott McLeod, Grumman's chief consulting pilot. Scotty, Walter has mentioned some of the things that the LEM must do. How does that make it different? First of all, of course, it doesn't have any streamlining outside.
Well, that's true, Steve. It doesn't require any streamlining, as Walter had mentioned. In addition, since we don't require any work in the atmosphere, we have no heat shield. The men cannot return to Earth in the LEM. They must go back to the command module first.
It's the first spacecraft with two engines, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It has, as Walter had mentioned, the throttleable descent engine and also an ascent engine.
So it's really two spacecraft in one.
Right.
And aside from that, and aside from, of course, the rendezvous radar and things it needs to get back to the command module, is it greatly different than any other spacecraft?
Well, no, it's not that different, Steve. What we've tried to do in the LEM is use everything that has been used in other spacecraft as much as possible.
This DISC-key, as we call it, the computer keyboard, is just about the same then as the one in the command module.
Yes, it is. All of our controls and displays, the 8-ball, our artificial horizon, and each one of the controls, as much as possible, is the same as the command module, so that when the crew comes into the LEM, they won't be going into an entirely different environment.
And, of course, the one thing that is different, Scotty, and Walter, is the fact that they don't have couches. They don't even have stools to sit on in the LEM, so they're going to have to stand up, just as we'll be standing here to help describe their activities. Walter?
Scott, welcome to our CBS News space broadcast. A first ever for Scott McLeod with us on this, and we're glad to have you aboard to show us through these LEM maneuvers.
Thank you, Walter.
Scott, by the way, that business of standing up really isn't a terrible chore since you're weightless anyway, as long as you've got some restraints to keep you from floating up and hitting your head on the ceiling there, huh?
Well, that's true. You have cables similar to these, if you can see them, that attach to the suit. And in addition, there is Velcro on the bottom of your boots and on the deck of the spacecraft. So this keeps you attached fairly firmly to the spacecraft.
Is that maybe the way we're going to walk around in space passenger vehicles of the future, with that Velcro on our boots?
Well, I guess we have the alternate of either something like Velcro or an artificial gravity.
Spinning of the spacecraft to create a gravity.
Yes.
Right. Well, we'll be back frequently. Stand by. CBS News color coverage of the flight of Apollo 9 will continue in a moment.
If you knew of a machine that stretched all the way from New England down the East Coast, a machine that connected people together east, south, north, and west, wouldn't you say it had to be the most complex machine in the world? Well, there is such a machine, and it's called the Bell Telephone Network. Western Electric people built or provided much of it. You see, Western Electric is the manufacturing and supply unit of the Bell system. We make things your Bell Telephone Company and other Bell Telephone companies across the country need to bring you dependable phone service. So you can call any place you want, anytime you please, and get the one phone you want out of millions and millions of phones, and usually for small change. Western Electric. Doesn't our name have a familiar ring?
It's T-minus 32 minutes and counting here at the Kennedy Space Center for the launch of Apollo 9 and its 10-day Earth orbital mission, a highly critical one to make the schedule of landing man on the moon this year. We've been talking about how critical the lunar module is to the success of Apollo 9 and to the success of the entire Apollo program. The LEM's been in development for over 6 years now, since NASA first accepted the concept of a vehicle which would ferry astronauts between the Apollo mothership and the moon. NASA made that decision a year after work had begun on the command module, and like the command module, the LEM has had its share of growing pains, and David Shoemaker tells us about them.
Strange. It doesn't have to fly in the air, so it's not aerodynamic. And it's sort of grotesque. It looks a lot like a spider sitting there on its legs. But I think for the job that it's designed to do, it can do it.
Jim McDivitt was not always so confident. He and his fellow astronauts have watched with understandable concern as engineers tinkered with the LEM over the years, making changes to improve it and changing the improvements. Tracing the LEM from its first concept through to its present incarnation gives some idea of how radical those changes have been. Part of the problem was they had to start to work before they really knew what they needed to land on the moon. Weight has been a crucial problem all along. 1/10 of a pound saved was cause for cheers. Metal was shaved wherever possible, and in some cases shaved too closely. A fuel tank pared down to save weight finally burst and had to be redesigned again. The first LEM got all the way to the launch site only to be shipped back to the factory because of fuel line leaks. And just last month, 9 fittings on the latest LEM were replaced because of a kind of metal fatigue. The Apollo fire caused the same kind of retesting and rethinking of the LEM as it did of the main spacecraft. The interior was rechecked and then more delay as flammable material was removed, wiring redone, and fire extinguishers installed. The astronauts, too, added to the wait and the delay by insisting they wanted radar on board so they could monitor the rendezvous. The engineers got even by taking away their couches and forcing them to stand, but the astronauts didn't really mind because the trip is short after all, and besides, now they can get closer to see out the rendezvous window placed awkwardly over their heads. But the most serious problem has been with the engines. The ascent engine, in its ground checkout, developed trouble something like a knock in your car's engine. The repair bill was slightly more, though, $5 million. The descent engine has had its problems, too. It also ran rough, and then 2 of them blew up during ground tests. Finally, months behind schedule, everything was put together, and the first and only LEM to fly so far lifted off its launch pad at Cape Kennedy. There were no men aboard this one. Neither engine worked as planned, but NASA decided the engines were not at fault, blamed electronics, and called the test a success. Still, a year later, a manned LEM was not ready, and so Apollo 8 carried thousands of pounds of water and not a LEM to the moon. It seemed only fitting somehow that if there was to be a LEM simulator to teach astronauts how to fly the LEM, it should have trouble too, and it did. Or rather, they did. 2 of them crashed. No one was hurt, but officials decided that training was more dangerous than the mission and grounded the trainer. Despite its hard luck history, George Skurla, the man responsible for assembling the LEM at Cape Kennedy, is still confident.
We've had our problems, but I think they're all developmental problems, and the spacecraft is a very sophisticated spacecraft. And we had problems with LEM 1 that we solved, and the vehicle was launched and flew successfully. And we had some problems with LEM 3, and we've solved those, and we fully expect that that vehicle will fly and fly well.
And one of the 2 men who is betting his life at will also has reviewed the problems.
Now, when we started out, we, meaning the Grumman Company and NASA, to learn how to build a spacecraft like this, there were a lot of problems. We had super lightweight wiring and super lightweight everything. And there were some things that were just too super lightweight. And we made those a little heavier. But we went through the development, and we were assigned a LEM 2, saw it go through its growing pains, and we got LEM 3, and it's saw its growing pains. But we've reached a point now where I have great confidence in the spacecraft. It's nothing wrong with it. It showed itself in tests to be very reliable.
Despite the public confidence of the men who build and will fly the LEM, there will be a collective sigh of relief when this mission is over. For all the publicity of the hazards of Apollo 8's flight to the moon, it is this flight of Apollo 9 that has concerned insiders most, and will really determine whether we'll be successful in our commitment to land a man on the moon before the end of the year. David Shoemaker, CBS News, Kennedy Space Center, Florida.
What's going to happen today, beyond the liftoff itself, once this spacecraft is in orbit, is this. This is what actually goes into orbit. The S4B, the third stage of the Saturn V rocket. Once it is in orbit, on its second revolution over Australia, this spacecraft and its service module, which actually form the spacecraft, separate from the S4B third stage. Then 4 panels do not come off like this. They blow off in space, exposing the lunar excursion module, or the lunar module it's called now. The excursion was dropped for fear it might sound like a picnic in the park or something, but the lunar module is exposed there. Then the command module is turned around and comes back and docks with the lunar module. And then later, springs eject the lunar module and push the entire spaceship and its lunar module away from the S4B, which is then fired to go into solar orbit. Then this is the equipment with which these men will be working and experimenting on the rest of the first 5 days of this flight. We can now go out to Downey, California, where at North American Rockwell they build the spacecraft, and where Bill Stout and Leo Krupp, our Downey astronaut, can show us just what has to take place for that delicate maneuver of docking today. Bill?
Walter, you see on the nose of the spacecraft the docking ring and the probe you were talking about a few minutes ago. And here at the home of Apollo, with Leo Krupp, who is the chief Apollo research pilot for North American Rockwell, it seems the question is, what does this mission mean in terms of the spacecraft, Leo? What are we asking it to do that it hasn't been asked to do before?
Well, Bill, for the first time, we're going to actually dock with the lunar module in space. So this will be the first test of our docking system. Also, after docking with the LEM while it's in the S4B, we will eject it for the first time, checking out the spring ejector system. Following that, we're going to do several service propulsion burns with the lunar module attached to the nose of the command service module.
And we've never done that before.
That's right. That'll be the first time for this. We've done it in a simulator many times, but this will be the first flight test. After that will be Rusty's spacewalk, of course, to prove that we can go from one vehicle to the other via the outside route. And following that, the LEM systems checkout, and the high point of the entire mission, of course, which is the separation of the lunar module in a manned configuration for the first time, where they'll fly out about 100 miles, come back in and do a LEM active rendezvous and a LEM active docking with the command service module.
How complicated is this docking, Leo?
Well, the docking really isn't too complicated. It's a lot like in-flight refueling in airplanes. On the nose of the spacecraft, we have the drogue, which is extended about 10 inches, and the pilot flies in using a target on the lunar module and a sight in his window to mate the probe and the drogue. There are 3 capture latches in the head of the probe which engage the drogue and hold the 2 vehicle in what we call the soft docking configuration. The probe and drogue are mated. However, the 2 vehicles are still about 10 inches apart. As soon as Dave Scott has his attitude all aligned, he will then throw a switch in the cockpit which energizes a nitrogen bottle and retracts the probe and pulls the 2 docking rings smartly together. This releases 12 docking latches, and the 2 vehicles are then firmly mated in a hard docking configuration.
And those 12 latches, Walter, Leo assures me, are a good bet to go all at once. I asked him whether 11 out of 12 would be a reasonable guess. He said no, 12 for sure. Certainly we're counting on it.
I believe it is true that if they don't catch, the pilots can control them manually, can't they, Leo?
That's right, Walter. We have an indicator in the cockpit which will tell us if we have 6 of them made it or not. And regardless of what the indicator tells us, Dave Scott will remove the tunnel, go up into the tunnel area and visually check each one of the latches. And if they're not mated automatically, he can mate them in a manual configuration.
At that altitude and that speed, they certainly better have a good catch to make sure everything goes.
What's the maximum speed tolerable there, Leo, for that docking?
Well, the limits, Walter, are from 0.1 to 1 foot per second at contact. However, in this particular docking that we're going to be doing today, the S4B will be 150,000 pounds heavier than normal since it has not done the translunar injection burn. So I'm sure Dave is going to go in very cautiously, and he'll probably dock at about 0.25 feet per second in order to keep the structural loads down, since both vehicles will be heavier than normal.
That's about equivalent of 18 hundredths of a mile per hour, I think.
That's pretty slow, but and once he gets contact, then he'll go ahead and thrust with his reaction control systems to push the probe into the drogue to make sure it doesn't bounce out.
That's
and
so
he can
slow.
hit within a foot of this funnel, and he'll go down into the hole and engage the capture latches.
That's so slow that I doubt that Bill Stout could hold his balance walking that slowly.
Well, we have Bill strapped in the seat this morning so he can't fall out.
Well, it's good to have you back with us, Leo, on the flight of Apollo 9. The weather is certainly not very good down here, but the count is going on, and there is not supposed to be any weather constraint to the flight. It's T-minus 21 minutes and counting. And back here at the Kennedy Space Center, waiting for the launch of Apollo 9, scheduled in 16 minutes from now, and the count is proceeding. A quick review: this is a 10-day Earth orbital mission around 150 miles up, the most complex mission yet planned by the space program. This to test the lunar module, the little landing craft that will take men from the command ship circling the moon down to the moon surface and back in the eventual moon landing mission. Now perhaps planned for July, if this mission goes well. If this mission does not go well, the entire moon landing program will have to be set back. The length of time depending upon the problems that develop on this particular mission. This is the first manned test of the lunar module, and once those big boosters you see there, the 5 F1 engines at the base of the Saturn rocket, boost that 6,600,000 pounds into orbit, and to the 17,500 mile an hour speed it takes to balance delicately between gravity and a flight on into space. Well, they will separate, and the lunar module will be tested with man in it for the first time. It's only flown once before, unmanned, this time manned flight. And the men who will take it away from the command ship 100 miles away, and will have to bring it back because otherwise they won't make it back to Earth themselves. And on the 4th day of this mission, Rusty Schweikert will make a spacewalk, 2 hours and 15 minutes. He will leave the lunar module, and as it is docked to the command ship, cross back to the command ship, climb into the hatch, and then back to the lunar module to prove, first of all, the new life support equipment he'll be wearing on his back, the life support equipment that provides oxygen and cooling water and communications equipment for the walk on the moon. And this will be the first time it will be tested by man in space. He'll also be proving out a capable emergency system that could provide for man to leave the lunar module and get back to the command ship without going through the docking tunnel between them, should that tunnel for any reason be blocked. For instance, should it be damaged in docking. The entire flight to take 9 days, 22 hours and 47 minutes, the splashdown to come a week from Thursday morning, 185 miles southwest of Bermuda.
CBS News coverage of the flight of Apollo 9 continues after this pause for station identification.
This is Apollo Saturn Launch Control, coming up on 3 minutes, 50 seconds. Mark, T-minus 3 minutes, 50 seconds and counting. We are go for launch. The countdown now turned over to the control of the launch vehicle test conductor for the last 4 minutes of the count. We'll go on an automatic sequence starting at 3 minutes and 7 seconds. Final communications checks now in progress between the spacecraft test conductor and the crew aboard the spacecraft. Some final checks in progress at this time. We have the report that we are clear for firing command. That is the automatic sequencer that should come in about 15 seconds. From that time on down, all aspects of the mission will be automatic, monitored by the computers here in the control center and at the pad. 3:10, we have firing command. Launch sequence start. The computer is in. The sequence is in at this time. Mark, T-minus 3 minutes. T-minus 3 minutes and counting. Our preparation is now complete. Our ready lights are on here in the control center. During this period, the various propellant tanks aboard the 3 stages of the Saturn V will be pressurizing. Primarily, we use helium on the ground to pressurize these tanks. The various vent valves will close as the countdown proceeds. We've now passed 2 minutes, 35 seconds and counting, all still going well. 2 minutes, 30 seconds. We should be getting an indication on pressurization of the 3rd stage. We have it here in the control center, 2 minutes, 20 seconds and counting. The 3rd stage now is pressurized. We'll be looking toward those 5 engines in the 1st stage of the Saturn V. The ignition sequence to start at the 8.9 second mark in the countdown. We're now coming up on the 2 minute mark. Mark, T-minus 2 minutes and counting. T-minus 2, all aspects of the mission still go at this time. The Apollo 9 crew standing by in the spacecraft. 1 minute, 50 seconds and counting. Once the ignition sequence does begin with the 5 engines, it'll take some 9 seconds or so to build up the proper thrust. The computers will automatically sample those engines and assure ourselves that we have 95% of the thrust. We will get a commit at that time, and the 4 hold-on arms will come back. We're now 90 seconds and counting. 90 seconds and counting. Vice President Agnew now has come up to the window here in the Launch Control Center along with members of the party to view the launch. 1 minute, 20 seconds and counting. All indications are we are still go at this time. 3rd stage propellant tanks have been pressurized. Final check of several panels by lunar module pilot Rusty Swikert. 2nd stage tanks now pressurized. Swikert confirms that he has the proper readings. 1 minute and counting. T-minus 55 seconds and counting, all still going well. We're coming up on the power transfer. Mark, 50 seconds and counting. We're now on internal power with the 3 stages and instrument unit of the Saturn V. All propellant tanks in the 2nd stage now pressurized. 35 seconds and counting. The vehicle now completely pressurized. The vents closed. We are go. 30 seconds and counting. T-minus 25 seconds and counting. All aspects still go at this time as the computer monitors. 20 seconds. Guidance release 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9. We have ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engines running. Commit. Liftoff. We have liftoff at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Roll
Plus 17.
program is in.
Roll and pitch program are in now to put Apollo 9 on the proper flight, azimuth, and attitude. Half a mile high. Roll is complete.